The subject line stopped me cold. Annual performance bonus confirmation. I clicked, already knowing the number would be lower than I deserved. What I didn't expect was the bold black line that read, total payout, 0.00. At the bottom, Darren Kessler's digital signature gleamed like a slap across my face. 12 years of sleepless nights, canceled vacations, and holidays spent in fluorescent-lit offices, all reduced to nothing in a single stroke. My hands trembled, not from rage, but from the effort to keep it hidden. That money wasn't luxury. It wasn't a second home or a new car. It was supposed to be my daughter's first semester of college, a promise I whispered to her the night my father died. I'll make sure you never have to carry the same burdens I did. Now, the promise had been erased with one keystroke. Now, if years of dedication can vanish with one keystroke, it's also a reminder that we must protect what no one else can, our own peace of mind. Take a moment today to do something that eases your stress. Even if it's just listening to your favorite song, tell me where you're watching from. Tap like and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible after giving everything you had. I had built my career as Director of Risk Protocol, the person no one noticed until something went wrong. If Cellcore Dynamics had avoided billion-dollar fines, it was because I stayed until dawn, double-checking the tiniest clause in global regulations. I wasn't flashy. I didn't network at rooftop bars. I was the firewall, the one who kept the empire standing. Across the polished boardroom table sat Darren Kessler, CEO, a man who thrived on spectacle. He thrived on squeezing margins until people broke, then calling it innovation, as the board reviewed the year's results. He leaned back, oozing charm for the cameras brought into document transparency. He called the cuts a new culture of efficiency, a phrase so rehearsed it stung more than the number. The sting turned to fire when the next slide appeared on the screen. Bonuses for senior executives. A young vice president, barely 30. And conveniently, Darren's wife's cousin had been awarded 6 figures for leadership alignment. I had mentored that VP only months ago, teaching him the protocols he now claimed as his own. I sat there in silence, spine straight, nails digging into my palm beneath the table. My entire body screamed for justice, but I forced my face to stay still. They expected me to snap, to beg, to show my wounds. Instead, I swallowed the rage like glass. The room moved on, but I couldn't unsee the truth. Loyalty meant nothing here, except to those who shared Darren's bloodline. I used to take pride in a title most people outside the company had never heard of, Director of Risk Protocol. It didn't sound glamorous. There were no glossy magazine covers or invitations to keynote conferences, but within Cellcore Dynamics, my signature carried more weight than the CEO's speeches. Every global launch, every compliance check, every billion-dollar gamble crossed my desk before it could see the light of day. If I said no, the world waited. If I said yes, regulators across continents nodded in tandem. I was the firewall, silent, unseen, but absolutely essential. That power came at a price, and I paid it without hesitation. I remember the night my father passed away. I was sitting in the compliance control room, reviewing a last-minute licensing amendment for a product Darren Kessler was desperate to push out before quarter's end. The hospital called, telling me it was time. I looked at the file, at the risk of a $600 million penalty if I missed a line, and I made the choice no daughter should have to make. I signed the clearance, then called back only to hear the words I will never forget. He's gone. For years I told myself it was noble sacrifice, that my family would understand, that the company would remember. Each successful launch seemed to confirm it. When regulators praised Cellcore's flawless compliance record, I felt the quiet swell of pride. No one outside the inner circle knew my name, but I knew, and I believed it mattered. Then came the company newsletter, the week after my bonus was slashed to zero. A glossy article, complete with smiling stock photos, declaring Cellcore's core value: family first. The words felt like acid in my throat. Family first? This was the same company that had once praised me for dedication beyond measure when I skipped my father's funeral to protect their profits. Now they paraded slogans that mocked the very sacrifices they demanded. I set the newsletter aside. But the sting lingered. Later that day, one of the few colleagues I still trusted, Marjorie, stopped by my office. She looked at me the way people do when they want to speak, but fear being overheard. Closing the door, she lowered her voice. "Lucina, you know they'll never give it back, right? All those nights, all those losses, they won't ever pay it back." Her words pierced deeper than Darren's insults ever could. Because I knew she was right. No salary bump, no public recognition. Not even the bonus I'd just lost could restore the years I traded away. The company had cashed those checks the moment I handed them my time, my health, and my family's milestones. For the first time, pride curdled into bitterness. My title, my sacrifices, my loyalty. It had all been currency spent on someone else's empire. And now, staring at the hollow promises of family first, I realized I had become invisible in the very system I once held together. The boardroom fell into silence after Darren's announcement. The words still floated in the air like smoke. New culture of efficiency. Everyone expected me to react, to slam my laptop shut, to raise my voice, to finally break the quiet armor I had worn for 12 years. Darren leaned forward with that rehearsed smirk, the kind that dares you to lose your composure so he can call it weakness. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. I closed the laptop gently, slid the papers into a neat stack, and stood. My voice carried evenly across the room. Unshaken. "Good luck." The phrase hung there, puzzling them. A few board members shifted in their seats, uncertain whether I was conceding or threatening. Darren laughed under his breath, mistaking restraint for defeat. That was the first time I realized how much they had underestimated me, not just my value, but my silence. As I walked toward the door, I caught sight of Andrew, one of Darren's junior assistants. He couldn't have been more than 24, still new enough to believe in corporate loyalty. His eyes darted away when I met them, but not before I saw the flicker of shame in his face. He had watched a woman twice his age, the backbone of compliance, dismissed like an afterthought. His lips parted, as though he wanted to say something, but he stayed quiet. That guilt would stay with him far longer than this meeting. The hallway outside felt strangely quiet, muffled compared to the suffocating room I had left. I pressed my phone to my ear before the weight of the moment could crush me. My daughter picked up on the second ring, her voice bright with youthful hope. "Hi, Mom. Are you okay? How did the meeting go?" I forced warmth into my tone. "Focus on your exams, sweetheart. Let me handle everything else." She didn't need to know about the $0 on the screen, or the condescension in Darren's voice. She needed to believe her world was steady. By the time I reached the elevator, a new message buzzed across my screen from an unknown number. The words made me pause mid-step. "You built the final lock. They don't even know." My breath caught. Only a handful of people knew about the hidden protocols buried deep inside Cellcore's launch system. Whoever sent that text had just reminded me of the one truth Darren and his board could never erase. My work carried more weight than their signatures. Still, I knew how they saw me: calm, polite, forgettable. A woman dismissed with a smile. To them, "Good luck" was nothing more than a farewell. But to me, it was a seed planted, patient and quiet, waiting for its moment to grow. The next morning, the office looked less like a workplace and more like a carnival of propaganda. Bright posters plastered every wall, each shouting the same line in bold blue letters: 10 days to launch. 2.6B future. Banners dangled from the ceiling. Screensavers blinked with countdown timers. And even the coffee cups bore the slogan. It was impossible to move 3 feet without being reminded of the fortune Cellcore Dynamics was about to make. I walked through the hallways quietly, letting the colors wash over me. On the surface, it was just decoration. Beneath it, I saw something else. A desperate attempt to make employees forget the exhaustion eating away at them, to replace frustration with spectacle. Darren's voice echoed from a recorded video on the monitors. Together, we're building history. But there was no together anymore, not for me. That realization hit harder when I opened a set of internal launch documents later that afternoon. I had reviewed those files dozens of times in past years. My name had always appeared in the compliance section, stamped beneath the CEO's signature. This time, the section existed, but the name was gone, erased as if I had never been part of the chain. I clicked back to older files, searching for proof that I wasn't imagining it. And there it was, in last year's report. A glossy image of Darren shaking my hand at the compliance milestone review. Except now, even that was different. The updated archive showed the same handshake, but the woman beside him wasn't me. It was Evan, the 30-year-old VP who had been handed a massive bonus for alignment. They hadn't just deleted me, they had overwritten me. For a moment, I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. The coldness in my chest hardened further, like ice settling around my lungs. I had built their safety net, and now they pretended I had never existed, as if to twist the knife deeper. An internal email arrived from the PR department. The subject line read, "Campaign launch, one family, one future." The body was filled with smiling stock photos of employees around picnic tables, children running through fields, and slogans about loyalty and trust. I nearly laughed at the audacity. Family first? Future together? Where was that family when I sat alone in a hospital hallway after my father's death? Double-checking clauses to protect their billions? Where was it when my bonus evaporated into zero? I leaned back in my chair, letting the irony settle like poison. Outside, co-workers hung banners and wore branded t-shirts with pride. Inside, I was already a ghost in their system, present in body, but scrubbed from their history. And as I realized they had erased me from their history, I couldn't help but wonder, what happens when the person they tried to delete still holds the key they don't even know exists? What do you think will happen next? Stay with me until the end, because something's coming they'll never see coming. The posters, the slogans, the erasure of my name. It all should have broken me. But instead, I sat at my desk in perfect stillness, letting the noise of the office fade into the background. If anyone glanced my way, they would have seen a woman typing emails and reviewing drafts as though nothing had changed. They didn't see the memory looping in the back of my mind, the one that had kept me steady for years. 4 years earlier, in a quiet conference room far from the eyes of executives, I had drafted a safeguard. Back then, compliance systems were evolving, and I was tasked with designing the master verification protocol for global product launches. Everyone else saw it as routine bureaucracy. To me, it was an opportunity to correct the imbalance I had lived with for too long. I wrote a hidden clause into the framework, simple, elegant, unnoticeable. If the system detected that an employee tied to a launch received a bonus reduced to zero, the master license would invalidate itself automatically. No alarms, no hacks, no theatrics, just silence, followed by collapse. It wasn't revenge when I wrote it. It was insurance, protection for people like me who spent nights away from dying parents, who traded their health for deadlines, who sacrificed more than the executives ever saw. I told myself it was just a failsafe, one that might never activate. But deep down, I think I always knew someone like Darren would force it into motion. And now he had. By signing that bonus letter with his digital signature, Darren himself had triggered the bomb he didn't know existed. Every countdown poster outside my office, every smiling PR photo, was now a fuse burning toward the inevitable. I must have been smiling faintly at the thought, because Marjorie, a colleague who had always noticed too much, stopped by my desk. She leaned on the partition, studying me with curious eyes. "Lucina," she whispered, "why are you so calm after what they did to you?" I expected, I don't know, anger, something. I glanced up, meeting her gaze with steady composure. "Sometimes, the loudest statement is silence." She frowned, confused, but didn't push further. I returned to my screen, fingers steady on the keyboard, while my heart beat in a rhythm only I understood. They thought I was irrelevant now, erased, disposable, but the system I had built didn't share their opinion. It remembered every sacrifice, every forgotten night. And soon, so would they. The countdown to launch had transformed the office into a graveyard of bodies that refused to rest. Hallways were lined with sleeping bags, pillows shoved under desks, and empty takeout boxes stacked like monuments to exhaustion. People stumbled through 18-hour shifts, eyes glazed, shoulders hunched, clinging to caffeine and the promise that all this sacrifice would mean something. Darren Kessler loved the spectacle. He walked the floor one afternoon with a camera crew trailing behind him, stopping at each cluster of weary employees to offer hollow encouragement. He raised his voice so the microphones would catch every syllable. "Hard work builds history, and you are the builders of Cellcore's future." The employees clapped weakly, some too tired to even lift their hands. I stood in the back, arms crossed, watching the performance. His words weren't for them. They were for investors, for the illusion that he was a leader pulling his team through adversity. What I saw was a room of people breaking down, piece by piece, while he basked in the glow of artificial lights. That evening, as I packed my laptop, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my daughter. She had picked up extra shifts at the diner near her college to cover the expenses my erased bonus was supposed to pay. "Sorry, Mom. I'll study after work. Don't worry, I can handle it." My chest tightened. The image of her wiping tables at midnight mirrored the sight of my colleagues collapsed over keyboards, fighting to stay awake, different ages. Same story. Sacrifice demanded. Dignity denied. The next day, the inevitable happened. A young engineer, bright, ambitious, barely out of school, collapsed at a station. His body hit the desk with a dull thud, sending pens and papers scattering to the floor. For a moment, the office froze in shock. Someone called out for help, and I instinctively rushed forward. Kneeling beside him, checking his pulse, Darren's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and dismissive. "Get him some coffee and back to work. We're too close to lose focus now." The words landed heavier than the sound of the engineer's fall. Coffee? As if exhaustion were weakness, as if human bodies were machines he could reboot at will. Anger rose in my throat, hot and unrelenting. I bit it back, forcing myself to keep steady as I helped lift the young man, guiding him toward the infirmary. His skin was clammy, his breath shallow. I caught Darren watching me, irritation in his eyes, as if my concern was an inconvenience to his narrative. At that moment, the thin thread of frustration inside me thickened into something darker. Hatred, not loud, not explosive, but cold and enduring. He had taken my bonus, erased my name, and now he treated the very people building his empire like disposable parts. I looked around the office, at the tired faces bent over glowing screens, and I knew Darren's cruelty had written its own ending. All I had to do was wait. 3 days remained. The office buzzed like a hive on the edge of collapse, every worker pouring what was left of their energy into meeting Darren's impossible deadline. In the midst of the frenzy, I sat in the compliance control room, the only quiet corner left in the building. The large wall-mounted screen in front of me displayed a digital timer. 72 hours. Each second ticked away with a faint click, a metronome counting down to the company's reckoning. Around me, engineers hustled in and out with reports, their footsteps quick, their eyes hollow. No one noticed the stillness of my posture, the way I studied the timer as if it were the only thing that mattered. They thought I was out of the loop now, irrelevant. The irony made me want to laugh. I didn't. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited. The quiet broke when two managers stepped inside, talking in hushed but hurried tones. One of them, a man named Foster, scanned a checklist before muttering, "We've tested every segment, but that final line of code, no one's touched it since Lucina wrote it." The room fell silent for a second, eyes darting toward me. Foster realized what he'd said too late, his face flushing. "I mean, of course it's stable. No need to worry." He forced a chuckle and quickly ushered his colleague out. The door closed, leaving a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. I returned my gaze to the timer, calm on the outside. But inside, a faint spark warmed me. They could erase my name from documents, replace me in photographs, and strip my bonus to nothing. But they couldn't erase the truth embedded in the system. The final line was mine. Untouchable. Later that afternoon, my inbox pinged with the latest PR blast. The subject line read, "Press Invitation, Athenis Grid Launch Celebration." The attachment was a glossy flyer, full of bold promises and staged images. At the center was Darren himself, his face beaming beneath the caption, "The spiritual founder of the Athenis Grid." I stared at the words, the bile rising in my throat. Spiritual founder? He hadn't written a single protocol, hadn't endured a single sleepless night poring over the labyrinth of international compliance laws. I had been the one to carry the weight, to sign my name on every safeguard that kept Cellcore out of ruin. And yet here he was, draped in titles meant to disguise theft as vision. I closed the email without finishing it. The hypocrisy no longer surprised me. It only clarified what I already knew. They thought the system was theirs to control, that my silence meant defeat. But every quiet breath I took in that control room was a reminder. Still waters hold the deepest currents, and when the timer reached zero, the current would pull them under. Launch morning dawned with a kind of electric anticipation that buzzed through every hallway of Cellcore Dynamics. By 7 o'clock, stock tickers were already flashing headlines. Cellcore shares surge 11%, ahead of 2.6B Athenis Grid reveal. Analysts called it a masterstroke. Investors flooded social media with predictions of record profits. And television anchors referred to Darren Kessler as the visionary who never misses. Inside the building, the mood was contagious. Employees who had dragged themselves through weeks of sleepless nights now walked with their shoulders straighter, convinced the suffering had been worth it. The exhaustion I had seen etched into their faces seemed to dissolve under the warm glow of anticipated victory. Hope can be a dangerous anesthetic, and Darren wielded it like a weapon. I watched from the back as he greeted reporters in the lobby, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile practiced to perfection. He shook hands, laughed for the cameras, and spoke with the rehearsed cadence of a man already writing his own legend. "Today," he declared, "Cellcore changes the future of technology." The crowd roared, hungry for his words, blind to the cracks just beneath the surface. The stage was a spectacle, giant screens looping glossy ads, countdown clocks ticking in unison, spotlights sweeping across the room like searchlights announcing conquest. Darren took the stage at precisely 9 o'clock, the prototype cradled in his hands like a sacred relic. The audience erupted in applause, cameras flashing like fireworks. For a fleeting moment, it almost looked unstoppable. And then, the smallest imperfection revealed itself. as Darren raised the prototype to the audience. One of the massive overhead lights flickered. Once, twice, then again. A ripple of unease passed through the room, quickly smothered by applause. But I always noticed, somewhere in the crowd. A journalist lifted his hand. "Where's the director of risk protocol?" he asked, his voice cutting through the noise. The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its simplicity. Darren's jaw tightened, but he didn't break stride. He waved to the audience, ignoring the query as though it had never been spoken. Cameras turned back to him, and the journalist's words sank beneath the flood of orchestrated praise. Still, I heard them echo. So did a few others. I saw Foster, the manager who had once admitted no one touched the final line of code, shift nervously in his seat. The music swelled, the lights steadied, and Darren began his grand unveiling. Voice booming, "This is the moment we've all been waiting for!" The crowd roared again, buying into the illusion that nothing could go wrong. But illusions are fragile things. Beneath the cheers and the flashing cameras, the truth waited, silent and patient. Like a storm hiding behind the horizon, the final seconds of the countdown pulsed across the giant screen. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 5 seconds. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 4 seconds. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 3 seconds. The room held its breath. Darren raised his arms like a conductor about to unleash a symphony. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward, and employees who had given everything braced themselves for vindication. Then the timer hit 0, instead of fireworks and applause. Every screen in the auditorium bled red. A sharp tone pierced the air, followed by words in bold white letters. Escrow invalidation, bonus, $0, triggered by executive signature. For one disorienting moment, no one moved. The audience blinked, as if struggling to translate what they were seeing. Then the silence cracked into chaos. Reporters scrambled to capture the glitch. Investors shouted into their phones, and engineers on the sidelines frantically tapped keyboards, trying to override what could not be undone. Darren's face drained of color. He barked orders into his mic, his confident voice now a hoarse rasp. "Restart the system! Roll back the file! Do something!" But the commands echoed uselessly. The lock held firm. Somewhere near the front, a vice president leapt to his feet, voice breaking above the din. "She warned us years ago!" Heads turned toward me in the back, their eyes wide with a sudden, desperate recognition. The ghost they had erased was suddenly visible again. Not because I raised my voice, but because the system itself had spoken in mine. The fallout spread like wildfire. Stock tickers on the side screens plummeted in real time, the green numbers flipping red faster than anyone could refresh. Calls from panicked investors overloaded the switchboard. Employees stared at their laptops as dashboards collapsed. Months of work evaporating with a single error message. Some wept openly, the sound raw and jagged against the backdrop of ringing alarms. And I remained seated, hands folded neatly in my lap, watching the storm unfold with the stillness of someone who had already lived this moment in her mind. For weeks they had mocked my silence, mistaken it for defeat. Now. That silence was the loudest voice in the room. Darren pounded the podium, sweat beading on his forehead, his perfect suit crumpling as he shouted for answers. Each demand only underscored the truth. This was not a bug, not a hack, but a trigger he had activated himself when he signed my bonus down to nothing. His arrogance had lit the fuse. The detonation was merely inevitable. The control room door burst open with a force that rattled the glass wall. Darren stormed in, his face red, his tie loosened, his composure gone. In his fist was a crumpled sheet of paper he slapped down onto the console in front of me. The email of my annual bonus. Bold and undeniable. Total payout, 000. "You did this!" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of fury and fear. "You sabotaged everything!" I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at the page, then back at him, and said the only words that mattered. "You signed it, not me." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Darren's rage faltered, his chest heaving as he realized the trap wasn't mine at all. It was his. His signature had been the trigger, his arrogance the weapon, and his empire the casualty. Outside, the chaos raged on. Reporters were clamoring for answers, investors were calling for resignations, and screens still flashed red with the system's final judgment. And then, as though the universe itself couldn't resist irony, a voice from the press conference carried into the room through the half-open door. "Mr. Kessler," a journalist asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you still want to wish your team good luck?" The words struck like lightning. The crowd outside erupted in uneasy laughter, sharp, bitter, almost cruel. Darren froze, his face blanching as the irony landed harder than any accusation. His catchphrase, his performance of optimism, had been turned into a punchline on live television. My phone buzzed. A single message lit the screen from a colleague who had once watched me get humiliated in that same boardroom. Your good luck was sharper than any blade. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and rose from my chair. Darren tried to stop me, his voice hoarse with desperation. But there was nothing left to say. His empire was unraveling not because I screamed, not because I fought, but because the truth had been written into the very system he thought he controlled. I walked out past the flashing cameras, past the laughter, past the crumbling facade of cell-core dynamics. The rain outside was steady, cooling against my face as if the city itself was washing the weight from my shoulders. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Darren would destroy himself with his own hand, his own pride, his own signature. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes it waits quietly for the arrogant to sign their own downfall. If you've ever given everything and been treated like you were nothing, remember this story. Your silence can be powerful. Your patience can be sharper than any blade. Tell me what you think the most powerful moment was. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like. Share this story with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.